Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to offer Spanish interpretation for this event. So before we even get into any of our welcome and introductions, I wanted to go ahead and let Carmen and Amelia from Linguistica, Interpreting and Translation Services, let everybody know how they can access the Spanish interpretation channel.
Hola, muy buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a la Junta. Esta Junta tendrá interpretación simultánea disponible en el lenguaje de español. Para poder acceder a la interpretación, si usted está utilizando una computadora, buscará el icono de un mundo que aparece abajo de su pantalla que diga Interpretación. Después seleccionará Español y los invito a silenciar el audio original. Si usted está utilizando una tableta o un teléfono, el proceso será un poco diferente. Buscarán los 3 puntos que aparecen en la pantalla que digan More o Más. Después seleccionarán Interpretación de lenguajes. Después seleccionarán Español. Una vez más silenciar el audio original. Y cuando han acabado, arriba de la pantalla habrá un botón que diga Listo, Done o Finalizar. Selecciónenlo para de esa manera poder escuchar en español. Likewise, for all of our monolingual English speakers, if you would like to hear any comments made in the Spanish channel in English, then you will also need to select a channel. In order to do that, if you are using a computer or a desktop, then you'll go to the bottom of your screen where there is a globe-like icon that says interpretation, and you'll select English. Please make sure not to mute the original audio. If you are using a tablet or a phone, the process will be a little different. You'll look for the 3 dots that appear on the screen that say More. Then you'll select English, once again, making sure not to mute the original audio. And then once you are done, at the top of the screen, there'll be a button that says Finish or Done. Select that so that way you can hear any comments made in Spanish into English. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amelia and Carmen, for providing those interpretation services this afternoon. It's very much appreciated. Wanted to first go over the agenda. We'll be covering some Zoom housekeeping items first. We'll go into welcome and introductions, a short little bit on Sigma 101 and covering groundwater conditions in the East Kaweah GSA. We'll then go into kind of the meat of the event, which is the groundwater allocation program for the water year 2022 and water year 2023, before heading into a moderated panel and then open audience Q&A for everyone who's joining us this afternoon to be able to get their questions answered. So starting off with Zoom housekeeping, I wanted to let all of our participants know that your video and microphone is turned off, and this webinar is being recorded and will be available online following the event in both English and in Spanish. For any questions that you have during the event, like I said, we'll have a portion dedicated at the end to answering those questions. So we ask that you start to submit those questions through the Q&A feature. So if you scroll to that menu, hover the mouse over that menu, you'll see there's a Q&A feature. So you can type your questions in at any time during the event, and we'll go ahead and address those at the end. For any technical difficulties, we ask that you use the chat feature for that Zoom technical assistance, and we'll try to address your questions in a timely manner. We have Brianna here on the line who's moderating that chat as we move along the event. So with that, I'll hand it over to Chris Hunter, Program Manager with the East Kaweah GSA, to do our welcome and introductions.
Thanks, Becca. I think we have a temporary solution for our visual issue here, so we'll do our best. So as they introduce themselves, we have Rebecca Quist and Brianna Hardy from Provost and Pritchard. And thank you for all that you do for these webinars and our public outreach efforts. We have Matt Clinshew from Provost and Pritchard and the East Kaweah GSA Technical Consultant. We have Craig Hornum. He is a board member for the East Kaweah and a local farmer. And we have Mike Hagan to my left. He is the executive director of EKGSA, the Linmore general manager, and also a local farmer. Back to you, Becca.
Sure. So a couple of goals before we dive into our content. We wanted you all to know, we're hosting this webinar so that the East Kaweah GSA is providing clear and transparent information on these new groundwater allocations, and also part of an effort to provide landowners and you all as stakeholders in this process an opportunity to have your questions answered. So Sigma 101, Chris is gonna, or actually I think we decided Mike is gonna give us a brief overview of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act.
So great, thank you, Becca. So this Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was passed by the legislature and signed into law in 2014, and it basically required, it said, hey, look, we're overdrafting our basins. We need to stop doing that. How are we going to do that? And so they developed the law, passed a law that gave local agencies the authority and the tools necessary to manage, bring the drafting of groundwater out of the ground to a sustainable level. And by sustainable, it means water being available to all landowners in the sub-basin. And we were required to form an agency by 2020, which East Kaweah and the other two GSAs in the sub-basin did. And then we were required to have a plan together by 19, we had to have the agency, and by 20, we had to have the plan in place. We submitted a plan that was under review. It didn't pass, so it's been resubmitted. It's under review now. So our objective now is to implement the plan, find ways of reducing the amount of water drafted out of the ground to be equivalent to the amount of inflow that comes in, or something close to that. And that's our objective with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. Back to you, Becca.
I think we're going to move into groundwater conditions with Matt.
Gotcha. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Matt Clinchu, Provost Pritchard, asked to give a quick background kind of on the groundwater conditions, kind of that set the stage for some of this allocation discussion. So getting into that, the groundwater levels have been on decline for many years. A lot of folks have been experiencing that. Really the last 15 years have been pretty exceptionally dry, 3 years really in total, the last 15 that have been wet. Got a couple hydrograph figures there for you, just kind of showing that trend since the mid-90s, with some of the interim milestones and measurable objectives, minimum thresholds for a couple wells just in the northern portion and southern portion of the GSA, really looking to manage around those and collect more data, really within the East Kaweah. In addition to those groundwater level declines, the East Kaweah has a shallower depth to bedrock that we'll get into. It kind of adds a little bit of a nuance for East Kaweah and some of their management decisions, as that some of the other GSAs don't necessarily have to deal with, since the aquifer is a little bit deeper on the western side of the subbasin. So speaking a little bit more to the shallowness of bedrock, next couple of slides I'll step through quickly, but there's a kind of a cross section. This has been provided in some of the GSP documentation, as well as some meetings for those that have been on some other calls. But looking at the cross section that's circled J, essentially it kind of shows what it's going to highlight on the next slide is essentially the steep topography that the East Kaweah sees coming out of the foothills, going to the valley, as well as kind of bedrock, being shallow and then really trailing off quickly about Highway 65. So getting into that next slide on the conditions, this is again just a snapshot of kind of what that's looking at from consideration. We'll spend a little bit of time describing it, but we've got the groundwater surface at the top. There's some lines showing what spring 2017 looked like, at least across this section line. So again, just a snapshot in time for a portion of the subbasin, as well as the fall 21 water surface elevations, so about a year old. We're collecting the fall 22 water surface elevations now, but essentially in some of this analysis for allocations and evaluation, we've got the base of aquifer that's shallow on that eastern side or the right of the screen, and then just disappears, gets deep pretty quickly once you get to Highway 65. Within that too, there's minimum thresholds, which is notated by MT on the slide. And during the planning effort and revisions earlier this year, the GSA looking at data, well completion, some contours, trends of groundwater level declines, established threshold regions that kind of quasi mimicked the groundwater, the historical groundwater gradients that kind of go at 100-foot depth bands essentially across the subbasin. So the decision at the time was kind of do a stair-step approach, kind of collecting different regions, threshold regions to be similar. And so that's kind of led to the stair-step approach as we got into sort of the analysis. And you're kind of looking, fall 21 line to those MTs, how much, the arrows that are on the page are indicating like how much space there is or isn't in some of those areas to kind of approximate how much water is essentially in those areas. So the threshold regions will be kind of going in and out of the page as we're looking at it, kind of north south, as this cross section is looking essentially in the east-west direction. That's kind of some of the technical components. A lot of play there. On this next slide, since Sigma implementation started with submittal of the plans in 2020, we really started off very dry. 2021 and 22 were very dry. Hopefully the rain keeps up in 23, but we'll see how that goes. But wanted to show a snapshot at least from the fall 20 to 21 period, focusing on the eastern side of the subbasin, looking at the GSAs. In that year alone, we saw largely between 10 and 40 feet of drop in elevation year over year. But in 2022 now, and compiling that for an annual report due April 1st of 23, and given the dryness of 21 or the water year 22, we're expecting sort of similar map like this as we get through that. So really being impacted by water levels dropping, a good chunk of the East Kaweah GSA area having a shallow depth of bedrock, so not necessarily having a lot more room to go further. That's led to a little bit of the need for accelerated management and just evaluation and actions to kind of move the basin towards sustainability in the remaining 17, 18 years of the implementation period. So yeah, quick overview. I think that's the last of my slides before we get into allocation.
All right, Mike.
Okay, I guess we're going to
You're
move
up.
into the allocation year. Sorry about that. Are we good, Becca?
Yeah, good to go.
Okay, rock and roll. So let's move to the next slide. So in terms of trying to accomplish sustainability, we have a couple options. We need to, the ultimate objective is to pump less out of the ground than we have been in the past. So historically, the basin's overdrafting around 120,000 acre feet a year. And that's a consistent number over a period of about 20 years. So it's a substantial amount of overdraft. So we, in the East Kaweah, as Matt highlighted, we have a smaller groundwater storage space because the top of our soil is closer to the bedrock than say out west. We might have a 50-foot space of groundwater, where out further west there might be 2,000 feet. Part of our GSA has more, part of it has less. So observing the trends in the groundwater elevations that Matt highlighted, the TAC, Technical Advisory Committee, and the Advisory Committee of the GSA recommended setting allocations. And so in 2022, October, the end of October, we set an allocation for the allocation year, October 1, 2021 through September 30, 2022. We call it emergency groundwater allocation, but we're now in the mode of setting allocations annually now because we are really struggling. The total allocation of 1.65 acre feet to landowners that are irrigating, and that when you exceed that 1.65, you'll be billed $500 an acre foot for that. And we're measuring the amount of water being consumed, or there's a term called ET, evapotranspiration. That number is going to be typically lower than what one person might pump. A person might pump 100 acre feet on their ground, but only 90 goes up in the air. And we don't know exactly the difference, but the more efficient your practices are, and typically you'll be more efficient on the heavier clay soils on the east side, our ET will be a number less than what a person's pump might say. So they may say 100 feet, but we're going to see 90 feet off that ground. So that's ET. So evaporation and transpiration. The plant working is transpiration. Evaporation is a loss of water due to heat, and it takes the water up into the air. So that's consumed. We use that as a consumed number. And that's how we're measuring your use. And the allocations are based on that consumption. So they're not, the word pumping and consumed or ET are not synonymous. There's a difference there where we would hope to see an ET value less than what you're pumping. But we are measuring your ET, and that's what we're going to be putting on your dashboard and measuring for you to farm with. In addition to that, the land will get credits for precipitation. That's about 92% of precipitation. And so we've captured all that information. We have the data of consumed water, the ET, from October of 21 through September of 30. And those are in place on your dashboard, but there are other things that aren't quite in there yet on the dashboard, including surface water deliveries. We have about 50,000 acre feet of that in the GSA. And then a couple other things that we want to get through iterations. And Chris later on will explain sort of the process for the billing. But we expect to have bills out for any water when you exceed the 1.65 acre feet, $500 an acre foot. We'll hopefully have those out sometime in March, April range. Next slide. So this is the announcement. Folks got that. I remember a meeting I had up in Wood Lake. It started out to be about 40 or 50 people, ended up being about 400. So this was the impetus in that. People were wanting to know more about that. And that's the announcement there for 22. Next page. Next slide. So as you can see, we've got 3 types of allocation buckets. So native supply is water that comes into the basin from native sources, which would mean precipitation and water going into streams, that water permeating into the ground through stream beds or lakes or other things like that. So that's a native supply. That's somebody doesn't own that supply. That's native. The temporary penalty, it's 3/10 of an acre foot. So the 0.85 acre foot of native supply goes through every assessed acre in the GSA. So even a person with 2 acres is getting that. They'll probably never use that water. So that's available for them to transfer to someone. The temporary tier penalty 0.3 is in there as well. That's what was in the plan as an overdraft value. We're using that this year and 22 last year, meaning ending September 30 of 22. There was no charge on that penalty tier. Then a half a foot was also given in penalty tier 2 in 22 for a total of 1.65 acre feet. In addition to that, that might be the next slide. Yeah, so in addition to that, there's precipitation. I'm guessing that's right around 0.6 of a foot, 0.7 of a foot.
On average,
Yeah, on the average, there's about 2.3 acre feet of total ET that you can remove from your property. Now that's on per acre that's in your APN. So if you own 20 acres and you're farming 10, we're still going to give you an allocation on a full 20 acres of 1.65 plus the precipitation. So that's how that all works. So if you're farming half, you now have for that space, looks like about 4.6 acre feet for that 5 acres out of the 10 that you're farming. If you're farming, a corner to corner, you've got 2.3 acre feet in 2022 without any other transfers or water brought in from another landowner within the East Kaweah. Next slide. So that's kind of the description there of the things I just talked about. So all irrigated land gets the 3/10 and the 5/10, and all parcels of greater than 2 acres will get the 85.85 acre feet, and all land greater than 2 acres gets the rainfall as well. So it's 92% of rainfall. That the idea behind the 92% is roughly 92% of the rainfall is evaporated off the ground and not returned to the ground. If some of it will run off, mostly the runoff comes from the mountains, but most of our water will hit a local stream. You'll see Lewis Creek and Cottonwood and small little Fraser down there doing some work on really heavy periods, and those areas will take that water in. But roughly 92% of the rainfall is emitted or evaporated off the ground or transpired through the plants on the ground, including weeds and native riparian, like the trees along the stream beds and that type of stuff. And so we'll go on to the next slide. So in the year that just ended in September 30, there were no charges to any water until you exceeded the allocation of 1.65 acre foot per acre. Now the 1.65 doesn't include the precipitation. So you might say, I had 2.1 acre feet that I delivered, but we're going to back out, the 6 or 7/10, and that would put you back down in that 1.65 range. If you exceed the 1.65, there will be a $500 an acre foot charge for that supply. We don't know how much of that's going to happen this year or not. We haven't really finalized those values yet, but that's where the charges will begin for the water allocation year ending September 30, 2022. Next slide. So again, I'm going to be very clear on evapotranspiration. This is not the amount of water you pump. This is the amount of water what we call consume, or you remove from the basin through your actions, farming, irrigating landscape, and that type of stuff. So when you pull water out of the ground or deliver water from the surface, that water will be mostly consumed. Sometimes it's more than can be consumed through evaporation or transpiration, and it'll return to the ground as a groundwater recharge. We're not getting a whole lot of that in this side of the basin, but that can occur as well. Typically, we're efficient on our irrigation practices where you're not seeing runoff. We're not over irrigating. This sort of approach will probably also guide people towards a more efficient effort on their irrigation practices. So this is done. This is done by an evaluation of satellite imagery. So satellite looks at this and places pixels on it, and it says, okay, when they look at how deep a pixel that is, they'll evaluate that and give you a number. Then this information is ground truth. There are about 10 stations in the East Kaweah that take the temperature, they take wind into consideration, they can measure moisture in the air, these types of things, and they take all that data and do a comparison against their visual reading of the pixels in that satellite imagery, and they'll coordinate all that data into an answer for us. And it's a highly efficient understanding of evaporation and transpiration. So they come out, we believe, with a very good answer, something we can rely on. There are challenges to that in some ground when it's just vacant or fallow or just open ground. You think of the hills on the east side, a lot of weeds out there, but they don't irrigate. There's trees out there that are just what they call riparian or naturally growing trees. Those will consume water, but those folks won't be charged for groundwater extraction because we know they're not pumping water for that purpose. And the information is given to us from Land IQ. That's the company that does the analysis. They're doing it all over the state. Pretty much every GSA from here south, and I think even some up in Kings, are using this method of analysis. Next slide. So if you have any more, want more detail or understanding of that, go ahead and visit that website. We've also done a presentation on that from Land IQ. Joel Kimmelshoe and Chris and others had that presentations, PowerPoint slides. Go ahead and look at that FAQs, look at that website to gain a little more confidence in this data analysis. The offset would be, can we go out and there's roughly 6,000 or so wells out there, put in 6,000 meters at a cost of $5,000 or $6,000, and then read all those meters, the amount of infrastructure you would need to do that, and it really wouldn't give us any better of an answer in our opinion. So this method is the most efficient method, and we have high confidence in the methodology. Well-tested science. So this is the timeline. You can look through this later at your pleasure, but the most important thing is we're trying to get to you a statement, what we call a pre-statement, somewhere around the 15th of January. And that way you can look at it and say, hey, look, I didn't do that, or I want to move some water from one place to another, or I want to make a deal for that year, go back and make adjustments to your prior year so that you can avoid exceeding your allocation numbers. And then hopefully then we'll go through a period of time. Looks like he's given a 15 to 30, 45 days, and then get to you a statement right around the end of March. And if there's any payments due for over using your allocation, using more than your allocated supply, that $500 an acre foot, those fees will be due in the middle of May. Okay, are we into 23 now? Okay, next slide. So 23 comes along and it's gotten even worse. We're seeing drop-offs. There's a sustainable management criteria, or the criteria that we use in the plan that's required by the state to analyze and to measure sustainability. There's a term in there called a measurable objective. That's the point where we want the water levels to be. It's something much higher than it is now. In fact, our measurable objectives in our plan is the water levels that we found in 2017. But the minimum threshold is the place we don't want to exceed. That's the bottom end of our operating space. So the top end would be the measurable objective, and the bottom end, that space we have there to consume that water, extract that water from the ground. that is the point of, we want to avoid that point. However, because of our practices, our overdraft, our dry period caused by the dry precipitation, not enough inflow into our streams, and a substantially reduced Friant supply, which is about 70% of our East Kaweah's supply comes from Friant. The other part comes from our surface supply. The other part comes from Wachumna. So we've had to lower the amount of water available, and we eliminated the allocation of the penalty tier 2. So now for 23, October 1st, 2022 through September 30, 2023, the allocation is 0.85 acre feet of native yield, 0.3 of an acre foot of penalty tier 1, and that penalty tier costs $500 this year. So there isn't, it's what you hit that year into $500. There's also a pumping cap of 2.5 acre foot per acre. Now we say pumping cap again, it's an ET measurement. So the limit is 2.5 acre feet of ET per acre plus precipitation. So you only have 1.15 acre feet of allocation. So if you wanted to get up to 2.5, you'd have to go out and ask somebody else to transfer their supply to you, allocation. And that can be from anywhere, really anywhere in the subbasin. So Greater Kaweah, Mid Kaweah, East Kaweah grounds. So, but 2.5 acre feet of ET is the limit. That obviously will be something higher than, something lower than pumping. And then also on top of that is precipitation. So on the 1.15 allocation, let's say it rains like it did last year. And I think we have some examples here. Do we have examples, if I recall correctly, Becca? I'll go to the next page maybe. Yeah, so here you go. Here's your allocation of 85 at no cost and 0.3 at $500 an acre foot for a total allocation of 1.15. If you did nothing else, you could ET 1.15 acre feet of water per acre of property. So again, we go back to that landowner who has 10 acres. Let's use 100. So they have 100 acres and they farm 50. That means they have 100 times 1.15 acres or 1,150 acre feet of water, or 115 acre feet of water for that 100 acre feet. And if they use that, if they're farming half of it, then they got 115 for half of it, or they got 115 for the full 100 acres. If they wanted more, they'd have to go out and ask somebody else to transfer their allocation. That's the next picture. So, but the maximum you would be allowed to extract from the ground for ET is 2.5 acre feet plus your rainfall. So if you have 2.5 acre feet and we have another 0.6, you'd have basically 3.2 acre feet. Most of our crops in the East Kaweah are right around 2.5 acre feet to 2.25 or 2.5 acre feet per acre. Some of the almonds maybe would be higher than that, in the 3 range, 3.25 range. That's the kind of experience we're seeing. A multi-crop ground, annual crop is using more than that in the 3 to 4 acre foot range if they're doubling a crop. So when you exceed 2.5 acre feet, that's the limit plus rainfall. So you got 1.15 allocated to you. If you go out, you find another amount of water, you can use that from somebody else plus the precipitation. Let's go to the next slide. So that kind of lays that out here. You can transfer in groundwater credits from somebody else. That could be temporary penalty tier 1 or native yield. Again, there's a lot of ground that isn't farmed that gets an allocation. That's an unfortunate approach, but that's what we have to do. We're not adjudicating anything. We're just regulators. So we can't say who has a right to more groundwater, but that's what we've done. So there are people out there with groundwater supply that you can ask for their supply to help you achieve more allocation. So everybody gets the 2 acres in 23, 2 acres or higher gets the 85, and the precipitation, and all irrigated land gets the 3/10. Next slide. So here's sort of an example. If you native yield, no cost. If you use the penalty tier 1, that's 3/10. A full acre foot will cost you $500. So if you used, 1 acre foot, that's $500 total cost for that. And then any transfer credits you get, that's between you and the landowner you're transferring from. There are no GSA fees. That's whatever the market that you and that individual agree to. So there's no other charges on our side. Next slide. So here's scenario 1. An individual goes out and gets we'll just pretend like this is a 1 acre farm, and they've got 8.85 acre feet plus the 0.3. They'll pay $500 for that 0.3. They'll pay 1/3 of, or 30% of 500, so it'd be $150 for that. And then the 1.35 acre feet, they went out and got that from somebody else. They have a grand total of 2.5 acre feet plus precipitation. So this person, unless this person needed 3.2 acre feet, they would have all the water that they need, groundwater ET, available to them on their allocation. If you exceed the 2.5, or you exceed the 1.15 without any making up with transfers in, you're going to see a $500 an acre foot cost for that water, plus a 1-for-1 loss. So the temporary penalty tier 1 doesn't have a 1-for-1 loss. That's just a price, $500 an acre foot. But exceeding 2.5 acre feet or exceeding your 1.15 allocation without transfers will cost you $500 an acre foot and a 1-for-1 loss the next year. So if you go over 1 foot, next year you'll go down 1 foot in your allocation. We'll move a foot off your allocation in 2024. Next scenario. So this is the scenario where they don't get any. They only have the 1.15 acre foot. When you exceed the 1.15, you'll see a $500 an acre foot charge and a 1-for-1 loss for 2024. Next slide. So here's calculating a 10 acre ranch. Becca's done the work for us here. You got 10 acres, 0.85, 8.5 acre feet of native supply, 10 acre feet at 3/10. You'll pay $500 for that. And you'll have 3 acre feet, a total of 11.5 acre feet at a cost of $1,500 to the GSA. Next slide. So here's some special cases. Again, fallow ground, we will assume the ET that precipitates off of fallow ground will be precipitation. There won't be an amount for groundwater removal. Grazing land or small acreage, they'll have the same, they'll credit back to 92% of precipitation. So typically we won't see a person exceeding that. I don't think we saw that this past year. So on these 3 types of land, you'll have the allocation, probably not use it, and we'll assume that your consumption is either de minimis, which means we're required to give it to you at no allocation, or it's a precipitation value. So those are kind of the rules the state has set up, and these are special rules we set up for our smaller landowners and our land that isn't consuming groundwater supply or surface supply. Next slide. Okay.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So now we're on to landowners' next steps. Next slide, please. So the GSA, with a tremendous amount of landowner input, created the water dashboard, which is the area where it provides transparency between the GSA, Land IQ, and the landowner. So far, we're at 56% of all farmed acres are in the dashboard. And even though the dashboard is still in development, it is the place to go as a landowner to engage with the information that we gather and to collaborate with the GSA and NIQ on your consumptive use. Next slide. In addition, hopefully everybody has seen the new public outreach program that we've implemented about 8 months ago. We've been doing in-person meetings, webinars like this, and also we now have a newsletter that we send out all the latest updates to everybody there. So please go to the website and /keep informed to make sure that you're up to date with the latest information. Next slide. And again, the website's been totally revised. In February it was revised, and every day in the month we're adding more material. And this is our new allocation page, which talks strictly about the allocation. All the information of today is on that web page, along with some tutorial videos and conversations about some of the most questions that we get regarding our allocations and rules and regs we discussed there. Next slide. Back to you, Becca.
All right. Thank you, Mike, Chris, and Matt, for those presentations, providing that information for folks. We're going to go ahead and move into our Q&A panel before we head into the open Q&A from the audience. And just as a reminder, even if you've had questions pop up, you can type those in at any time to the Q&A feature on your Zoom. So if you click that Q&A button, it'll allow you to submit a question now, and we'll go ahead and address those after we move through our panel. But first, I just wanted to direct a question over to Mike, who is the Executive Director of East Kaweah, Manager of Linmore Irrigation District, has a lot of knowledge on the activities of the agency and work on driving those. So obviously working towards sustainable conditions amidst consecutive years of drought isn't easy. Besides the need for these allocations in the East Kaweah, are there any other solutions that the agency is looking at or implementing to achieve its sustainability goals?
Yeah, so the biggest objective for us would be to bring in surface supply, additional surface supply on wet years. So that is possible through Friant. So we import that supply from Milverton Reservoir down the Frank Kern Canal and delivered. We have several projects already in place that a release into Cottonwood Creek, Yoke Hall, and Lewis Creek releases. There's a basin being developed in the city of Lindsay where they take water from Linmore Irrigation District. Linmore has another project adding basins to our west side where they're able to spill water in there on wet years. So on very wet years, our objective is the water agencies that have access to surface supplies to bring more of that in to the area. Additionally, the appropriators off of the Kaweah St. John system are developing projects where they too can put water, pull it off the river, place it in a basin where it will percolate into the ground and become a groundwater supply. And so those are the objectives: reducing the amount of pumping and increasing the amount of surface supply. And one of the challenges we have as a basin is about 20% of our supply in the basin comes from the CDP. And so that is highly dependent upon choices or decisions made by a Fresno manager in the Bureau of Reclamation. So that supply has been heading down the river to the exchange contractors and not getting to us like it would have. So we've lost about 100,000 acre feet in the past 3 years on that decision alone, and more than that if you go back into about 2014. So our goal, we have those in our projects and management actions. We have a projects and management actions matrix. The board approved. It was recommended by the advisory committee and the technical advisory committee And so those projects and management actions are underway. So we're hopefully going to see some wet periods, and obviously, we won't be in an eternal drought, but we're in a substantial one right now because although we got good water in 17 and 19, we had terrible water from 12. Aside from 17, 19, 12 till now has been it's about 80% of normal. So 80% of normal, 50% of the fry and supply delivered. Those kind of things really impact the East Kaweah because we're highly dependent upon that fry and supply. It's a large amount of water. It's 80%, 70% of our supply, surface supply in the East Kaweah, the balance being Wachumna Sentinel Butte supply off the river. So that's our objective, is to add more supply on wet years.
Awesome. Looking ahead at hopefully some rain and snow. Chris, you touched on this briefly, but maybe you can just give us one additional detail about how the new water dashboard tool might help landowners, and maybe just share a couple pieces of data that the dashboard can deliver to landowners.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, there's a great question from Alex in the Q&A, so maybe I'll just address this question while we're at it. So the dashboard is a tool, and there's a whole team around it, program developers, programmers, etc. I'm developing these tools to provide landowners with the resources and transparency they need. So right now we're working with every surface water purveyor in the GSA to accumulate all the delivered water to every landowner. So the question that Alex has mentioned is how do we get credits for our surface supplies or our groundwater recharge? Well, those will come directly from your districts, and they'll be inputted into the dashboard. In the dashboard, you'll be able to go in there and be able to manipulate those supplies to make sure that we're applying the surface water to the appropriate parcel. And also in there are some metrics that are very important. You can look at your crop type and compare your usage to others inside the GSA. And so there's a lot of metrics that help you understand from a holistic point of view, whether within the allocated supply or whether I'm above and where I'm above and how do I make adjustments. So some of these features are being worked on today. We do have all of the ET data from Allocation Year 22 in there. Precipitation is in there now. We expect on the timeline it noted that January 1st was the request by the surface districts in the GSA to give them more time to get that data there. So we're hoping on January 1st, we'll have all the surface water entries. And then we will move to being able to record and track water transfers in there also.
Awesome. And I just put the link in the chat for anyone who hasn't created their water dashboard account, would like to go there and create that now or after the webinar ends.
I would like to note, just to let people know, there's no fee for this. So you're already paying your assessment, and that covers this cost. So, and there's a whole team of people to help you, set up your dashboard, whether you have one parcel or you have 500 parcels. There's a whole team of people that can help develop that at the GSAWD.com website.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Chris. Getting back to maybe slightly more technical side of things, I'm going to ask Matt, as you've come to know this area more from a technical perspective, as the consultant, the hydrology, the groundwater trends, what do you think is unique about achieving sustainability in the East Kaweah?
Yeah, from that, I think it's been hit on a little bit with some of the prior responses, but the fry and supply and the importance of that to the East Kaweah with the districts as access to getting additional water to the area, beyond just relying on local watershed runoff and rainfall, is there's more reliance on East Kaweah standpoint compared to the other Kaweah GSAs. So that's one unique perspective. The other component is just the shallowness of the aquifer. That creates some unique challenges with water level declines and not being able to really go deeper. The GSA has to get a little bit more thoughtful and use some other solutions and management actions essentially to try and achieve that. So then in addition to that, there's a north area, there's a south area, there's differing, soils, hydrogeology, interaction and stuff. So it's pretty complex, and some data gaps and other understandings that, the GSA has just got to, partner with local landowners and other folks to achieve that standpoint, and lots to go into it, from policy perspective, technical and legal. So, but the, Bryant Division, CDP, as well as the shallowness of the aquifer are pretty unique technical components that are going to be important in decision making and actions going forward for the East Kaweah hitting sustainability.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Just to round out the panel, we'll go to our board member, local grower, Craig. Maybe you can just share your perspective on all this as a board member and as a grower in the area as well.
Sure. I think that the majority of those of us on the board are growers. The things that we discuss are things that we're doing on a daily basis. There isn't anything that we're asking other people to consider and look at doing that we haven't already done ourselves. From my perspective, I've dealt with areas of decreased water availability for 20 years. So some of the things that we're dealing with here are not new. There's a lot of information available out to growers as far as how they can get the biggest bang for their buck from a water application and utilization standpoint. And all those things need to be addressed because this is a pretty tough situation. It's not going to fix itself easily. You've got, decades here of pulling ourselves out of this fire. So it's going to be a long-term approach and a long-term solution to make sure that we do everything possible to keep our groundwater in a position that we have groundwater and not completely drain it.
Awesome. Thank you, Craig, for sharing that perspective. We appreciate your knowledge, expertise, and what you do in the area. So that's going to close out our Q&A panel. We'll go ahead and move into our audience questions. I see that we have a few that have come in. A couple are looking for just some additional clarification on the surface water piece. So maybe those can be answered again. I know, Chris, you just touched on it, but maybe restating how this surface water piece works into the ET and how it calculates into the allocation and what people will be billed.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I think you said Chris, so I hope you did. I'll take the question anyway. So the GSA is monitoring consumptive use with ET. So the ET number really doesn't understand where that water derives from. So what we do is we get your surface water credit, so to speak, from your surface district. And then we give you a credit for that amount in your dashboard. So if your ET value is, say, 3 acre feet, and then we reduce precipitation. So let's say you're at 2.3 acre feet, and then you had half an acre foot of surface water delivered. Then from that 2.3 acre feet, we reduce the 0.5 acre feet and get you down to the 1.7. And that would be your groundwater use within the GSA.
Nice. Good example. Next question from Greg is, are all the private ditch companies supplying delivery data to the GSA? I think this would again be for either Chris or Mike.
Yeah, so every surface water purveyor in the GSA is working with the dashboard team to provide that data. It is a big lift for our surface water districts and ditch companies to provide that data. It's not a requirement that is required in the past. So there's a group of people that are helping get that done, and we're hopeful that we'll have all that data by January 1st.
Great. A question from Cliff. Is some type of recharge credit available for grading ponds on the farmed property?
So let me address that. So what's going to happen is an entity, I'll use Linmore Irrigation District, they're going to say they have a meter at everybody's turnout, everybody's property that gets water supply from Linmore. And so the meter will say, we delivered 100 acre feet to farmer Sanchez, right? So Frank's got water, he's got 100 acre feet. And that's what we're going to report to the GSA is 100 acre feet were delivered to Frank's property. If Frank puts 100% of that in a pond, the ET is going to see some evaporation, but there's obviously no transpiration. They're going to see all that number, that let's say 90% of that 90 acre feet, or we see 10 acre feet leave the earth, leave the basin. 90 acre feet is going to be assumed to be a groundwater recharge. So you're going to get a credit, a surface supply credit on your account for 100 acre feet. And then when the ET number comes in, it's going to show your deduction of 10 acre feet. So that's how you'll, if you, in a basin, of course, the district's got several basins and other basins are getting put in. We're going to evaporate off of that, but most of that water is going to go in the ground, and that value, whatever is not ET'd, will be allocated or be left in your account if you take it as a private landowner. Hopefully that answered the question. Real quickly, Sue Ruiz at Self-Help asked a question, how are you allotting for farmers, maybe 100 acres feet or less, probably row crops? That's a good question. We're not doing anything different. Everybody is allocated based on the acres that they own. So that 100 acres would get the allocation based on their APN size, and that's how they have to farm with that, just like anybody else would have to farm with that.
Great.
So that's what we got on that.
Thanks, Mike. Good eye. A question from James. Can groundwater allocations be transferred from the Tule Basin GSAs?
No. They can be from the other two GSAs in the subbasin. So Kaweah only.
All right. Next question from Christina. What will the process be for transferring allocation credits? Will we be able to manage those allocation transfers through the dashboard?
The dashboard at this point in time does not do that. So you can request a transfer form from the GSA at the groundwater at ekgsa.org email address. And then you can fill out that form and sign it between both parties. And then we have the ability to honor that credit through our accounting system until the dashboard can have that there also.
All right, great. I know we have some in the chat, so I'm gonna scroll back here. A recent question. It says, I'm a homeowner within the EKGSA. I do not farm any of my land, so I'm not able to add a map on the water dashboard, and I'm unable to see my groundwater use. So maybe talk about the different categories of owners and the acreage cutoff.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to assume that the party asking has a parcel that's greater than 2 acres. Again, we do not monitor or manage anything less 2 acres or less. If you do have an issue with the dashboard, Becca, if you could maybe reply back with the phone number to the dashboard team, they can help walk through any issues that you may have.
Perfect. Yeah, so we'll get that contact information to the help desk in the chat. In the meantime, Todd asked a question: how will dry farmed winter wheat crops be classified that use no groundwater supply?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and we're hoping to see that works out just as we are hoping it works out. So we can in some way identify, I'm not saying the farmers are liars, but we got to make sure that no water is being pumped out of the ground or surface delivered to that ground. It truly is a dry land farming. We should only see the precipitation. However, some crops, and I'm thinking of alfalfa as an example, they can dig pretty deep in the ground. We're just going to have to work with the landowner to make sure that there isn't a pumping going on there or surface supply being delivered. So the hope is that we're seeing on your winter wheat crop, which wouldn't have 20-foot roots, they may be 2 feet in the ground. We're hoping to see that it is dry land farming 100%, and we're not. There's no other supply being delivered. We're going to assume, if you report to us, hey, we didn't put any water on that ground, and that's all 100% dry land farm, we're going to have to work through that process.
Yeah. And Mike, to reiterate, if you go in the dashboard, you have the ability to select that, that's winter wheat. So it's recorded, and we've done quite a bit of work with some large scale, dry land farming. And we find that as long as after you make your cut and you're not going to irrigate, if you till that field, we do see a complete removal of ET. That's anything above precip goes away. So we feel like we're going to be really accurate there. And the only side thing is if you cut and let it grow back, whatever soils in whatever moisture in the soil it's going to consume. But again, I would think that the ET reading is going to be relatively close variance with precip, and we can make those adjustments.
Yeah, I have a couple on let me address these that I see here from Stuart, Ken, and Greg. So surface supply water it'll be an annotation in your account for surface supply delivery. And at some point, I'm not sure if they're there yet, but you're going to be able to choose what the order of use on your supply. Precipitation is obviously going to be automatically first. Then you could choose to consume your surface supply or your groundwater. Some folks might want to say, this is kind of thinking out of the box a little bit, but I want to use only, even though I'm delivering 100% of my need from the surface, I'm going to always want my groundwater to be taken off my account first, because surface supply values have a perpetual life. They don't have a 5-year life on it. So that value stays in your account until it's consumed. So those kind of things you'll have to work through as a landowner, how you want to address that approach. And then it's sort of the same for Ken's question: how does surface water use calculating these numbers? Obviously, we deliver 100 acre feet to that land. That will be in your dashboard. Your consumption order will determine how much of that is consumed or removed from your account based on the ET or consumption that we saw from the satellite imagery. And are all private dish companies supply and deliver data to GSA? At this point, yes, some struggles, but that's kind of why this has taken a lot longer than we anticipated, because it's something that the federal contractors have all been metered, so it's a lot easier for them. It's a little more difficult for like with Chumner, Sentinel Butte, Antelope, those folks who have surface supplies, they have weirs. It's a little more challenging for them, but they're working through that. We're going to get that data soon.
Great. So looking at the open questions here. There's one we haven't addressed in the Q&A box. Is there a way to find market value for transferred water and or a marketplace where people that have water to transfer or want to transfer water can connect?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't answer that question for you. It's really, I know one of our landowners, she asked, can I have the list of APNs in the East Kaweah and their landowners? And we can give that out. You can go out and look at those individuals, find people with open ground. I couldn't tell you what the market is. I know a lot of people are out doing that work now, trying to, sort of develop a long-term relationship. And that they're working that out between the landowners. There is in the basin, there is a study on a potential market program. Not sure how what will come of that or how it will be used, but that's being studied at this point.
Michael will note that we are aware of the request for that feature, and we are working on trying to provide some resource there. We have to kind of figure, what we can provide, what we can't, given that these transactions are private transactions between landowners. But we are aware of that and trying to figure out a solution for you.
Great. I advanced the slides to show the GSA's contact information, just in case anybody wants to follow up or needs to hop off the webinar. There's one question in the chat from Alex. If I'm buying a property, can I see the 2023 allocation for that property somewhere outside of the current owner's account? Example, the carryover credits from the last year. So I think, Chris, this would be a question for you on the dashboard.
I'm going to make the assumption that the person has the legal right to get the information. And if so, you could request that from the GSA directly if you don't have a dashboard account, or if you have a dashboard account, you can go in there and add those parcels to your dashboard account and see the information there. If you're looking for surface water transfers, again, we don't have those yet. So we're hoping to have that information in January.
So maybe, Alice, can I maybe ask another question and maybe further for Chris to answer? So this person's looking to buy this property. Can the landowner give them authorization to look at their account?
They absolutely can. You can go into the dashboard and you can send a link from the dashboard to anybody you want to share your account information. Thanks, Mike. I didn't see that part. Yeah.
All right. Alex said, thank you. Sounds like you addressed his question. I'm not seeing any other questions. Brianna, is there anything that you saw in the chat that we missed and did not address yet? For sure, the question and answer box, all the questions there have been addressed, but did we miss anything?
There was one from Ramona that I think got answered. I don't know if she could see the answer.
I answered that from Ramona. Yeah, I got that one.
Other than that, we got everything.
Okay, great. Oh, I'm seeing. So the question from Ramona, I think I see what you're saying, Brianna. The boardroom mic response only went to the host and the panelists instead of the whole audience. Okay. Yeah.
Can you forward that out? I can just make this, say it as well. So Ramona, who's a mayor of the city of Lindsay, asked, what about folks inside the city boundaries? So the city of Lindsay is basically a net provider of groundwater. They import about 60% of their demand from the federal contract, their federal contract on the CDP. Strathmore is the same way. There's 100%. And so both of those communities are adding water, Mona, and you're not observed. I mean, we don't look at your ET and say, this is how much the city's using, therefore, you're not also not having an allocation to offset it. So in the development of the allocation, the 85.85 acre feet, it's assumed that the city and other municipal industrial users, domestic users, are consuming about 4,500 acre feet. So that water is off the table. It's actually more like 3,200, 3,300. But we pulled 4,500 acre feet of native supply out of that, and it's reserved for de minimis, domestic, municipal industrial use. So you're not charged, nor are you observed, Mona.
Awesome. I think for now, boardroom, Mike and Chris, that's all we have.
Right. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks everyone for
Okay.
joining us. Again, contact information is on the slide here. We will be posting the recording as well as the PowerPoint slides to the ekgsa.org website. So visit that website, take advantage of the resources, and we'll see you next time.